I'm not sure what I hope to gain by sharing this story. In the past, I used to listen to these kinds of tales just for fun, whether I was traveling on the subway or running in the park, without truly believing in many of the things they describe. However, I suppose that's always our reaction until something similar happened. A few months ago, two friends and I decided to move into the same apartment. I had already been living with Mark, a university friend, for just over a year, when Ivy, a mutual friend, suggested that we find a place with 3 bedrooms and split the expenses. We began searching for something closer to our jobs in the city. We found an apartment very close to a busy street just across the avenue from the downtown area. Although the neighborhood had a bit of a bad reputation, the place was perfect for us, spacious, just a step away from our job. Our friend Carla had given us the tip. She had gone to see it a few days earlier, but didn't like it. For us, however, it turned out to be the dream place. We moved in quickly, and upon settling, we organized a small gathering with friends, including Carla. After a few beers, she confessed the real reason why she hadn't wanted to stay. She claimed to be very sensitive to the vibes of places and swore that something terrible had happened in that apartment. Over the next few weeks, and after several chats in the elevator, I managed to uncover the story told by one of the neighbors. The landlord assured us that nothing strange had happened in the apartment, but a friendly neighbor from upstairs, who lived alone with Bulldog, shared what he knew. This apartment had belonged to an elderly couple who had lived there since the 1970s. About 15 years ago, the man passed away, leaving the woman alone. Over the years, they started to hear her screaming at night, and some neighbors even saw her wandering the halls in a nightgown. The situation became concerning. Some neighbors contacted the woman's son, who hadn't visited in years. He supposedly came by once, spent only a few minutes with her, but the next day a woman arrived to take care of her. This caregiver came for a few months until one day, she just stopped coming. The elderly woman ceased to go out, but one night, weeks later, she was heard screaming again. In the following nights, neighbors claimed to hear her speaking soft, as if conversing with someone. What was alarming was that the night after they heard her talking, several neighbors saw her walking through the courtyard in her white nightgown at the early hours of the morning. The next morning, someone called a family member of the elderly, a social worker, and asked him to check on her health. That same day, several people arrived and knocked on the door for quite a while. When no one responded, they forced the entry, and upon opening the door, a stench filled the building. They found the body of the elderly woman in her bed, already decomposed. The coroner reported that she had likely been dead for at least 2 weeks, which made it impossible for neighbors to have seen her then. While the neighbor was telling me all this, petting his dog, he seemed to notice my horrified expression. He told me he was just sharing what he had heard from others. I didn't see her in the courtyard, nor did I see her coming down the stairs. I heard screams and voices, but it's easier to think it was someone else's TV than to believe in ghosts, said before saying goodbye and taking his dog for a walk. When I got back to my apartment, I found Ivy and Mark in the kitchen preparing dinner. I couldn't help but tell them what I had just learned. As I recounted the story of the deceased woman, I felt a chill run through me. Their response made me tremble. Ivy confessed that she already knew part of the story. Before Carla mentioned what she had felt in the apartment, there had been a moment at the party around midnight when some friends from work stayed behind. They knew nothing about what had happened. When there was a silence, they heard a woman talking from the bedroom. They stood there, stunned, unsure if anyone else was in the apartment. Then, they peeked into the hallway and saw an elderly woman standing in the dark, watching. As I recounted this, I asked Mark what he thought. He, being more analytical, replied that he wouldn't believe any of it if it weren't for the circumstance. He mentioned that twice, in passing by my room with the door slightly ajar, he had seen an elderly woman standing right by my bed. After that conversation, I'm writing this from my room, and I haven't been able to sleep well. However, something tells me we are not in danger. The apartment is perfect, and despite everything, I think we will stay here. So, I ask you to wish me luck, and thank you for listening to this story. When I saw an image of a mountainous area between two cities, I felt inspired to share an experience that, although it isn't particularly paranormal, is undoubtedly the scariest thing that has ever happened. I'm from a colonial citywide, but most of my mom's family is split between Tijuana, San Diego, and Utah. My grandparents even live in Tijuana, so that city becomes our meeting point during the holiday. In 2014, it was one of those rare occasions when we could all gather to spend Christmas together. I remember that my Uncle Fernando had just bought a Toyota 4x4 truck that he had been eager to try out. He wanted to take it to a friend's ranch near La Rumorosa, a place far from civilization next to a lagoon. We decided to make a short trip to the ranch, attended only by the younger members of the family. A snowstorm was forecast, and not many were keen to face the cold when they could stay home, cozy and enjoying the treats my grandmother was preparing. We traveled a day after Christmas, and I was with my cousin Sella, who was my age, and my cousins Alex, Christian, Benja, Mario, Fer, and Pablo, who are a bit older. My uncle Fernando guided us on the way. I didn't remember passing through La Rumorosa before, even though my parents had taken me there when I was a child. So curiosity led us to explore this mysterious road, stopping to take photos just as the sleet began to fall. One of my cousins shouted that there was a bighorn sheep nearby. We thought he was joking since we had been playing around, but my uncle had warned us that bighorns, iconic animals of the region, rarely approach people. Upon focusing our eyes, we confirmed that there was indeed a bighorn sheep watching us about 70 meters away, standing on some rocks. We barely managed to take some blurry photos with our phones before it disappeared from view. My uncle excitedly told us that this could be a good omen for the rest of the trip, but later we would realize that perhaps that omen wasn't as positive as it seemed. After several hours of driving on dirt roads, we arrived at my uncle's friend's ranch. We were greeted by Don Manuel, the caretaker, because the friend wasn't there. Don Manuel had worked his entire life on ranches in the area, and now at an advanced age, he only took care of these places during seasons like this. He thanked us for being there since strange things had happened in the days leading up to our visit. Several animals, including goats and even a calf, had disappeared. He suspected someone was stealing them because he had seen the calf alone, so he asked a friend to accompany him, and now he felt more at ease with our presence. The young man accompanying Don Manuel Irineo wasn't so calm and had a different theory. A scavenger took them, he told Alex, Christian, and me, while showing a blurry image on his phone of something he claimed to have seen a year before. But the truth is, it just looked like a smudge that could have been anything. As the night wore on, while we were preparing dinner, two of my cousins made noises outside that sounded like howls, reverberating in the solitude of the mountain. Suddenly, they burst in, alarmed, saying that something had responded to their howl. We thought they were joking, but they were very insistent. Something had clearly answered. My uncle tried to calm us, suggesting it might be someone playing a prank, but Don Manuel interrupted him, saying there were no ranches for miles around and that, with the weather about to snow, no one would be outside at that moment. I asked the guys to repeat the sound, and although my cousins hesitated, we eventually convinced, after a few seconds, something responded from afar. I'll never forget the expression on my uncle's face, one of the bravest men I know, upon hearing what we had just heard. I don't know if it was fear or confusion, but just as he asked us to come inside, we heard branches breaking, as if something large was moving among the trees. We went inside and tried to forget what had happened. After a while, Don Manuel, who had stayed outside, called urgently for Irineo to come out with weapons. He had seen something lurking near the animal and wanted to catch it, even though he didn't want to. My uncle and my cousins went out in search of whatever was out in the darkness of the trees. It was an especially dark night, and the snowfall had just begun. Neither my cousin nor I went out, so I will recount what happened according to what they told us later. The sound of the branches revealed that something was moving away from the animals toward the forest. As they approached, they split into three groups, each led by my uncle, Irineo, and Don Manuel, who were the only ones with weapons. The others had machetes and tools from the ranch. Benja and Mario went with Don Manuel, who seemed unafraid as he followed the steps echoing among the trees. Don Manuel was sure he was just a few meters away from whatever had taken the animal. They advanced for several minutes and lost sight of the others, which began to worry Benja and Mario. Don Manuel told them to return, but they didn't want to leave them alone. Minutes later, a nauseating smell alarmed them. It was like carrion, and Don Manuel stopped silently, aiming his weapon into the darkness. He seemed to see something, but Benja and Mario, gripping their machetes tightly, couldn't distinguish what it was. When Benja shined his flashlight where Don Manuel was pointing, something enormous stepped out of the darkness, moving forward. It looked like a person over 2.5 meters tall with disproportionately long arms. In seconds, seeing that, they turned around and began to run. No one remembers the creature's face exactly, only that it appeared to be covered in reddish or brown fur. Mario placed himself behind Don Manuel, who ran surprisingly fast for his age, looking for protection. Suddenly, they felt that this thing was chasing them, its heavy steps shaking the ground. Benja ran ahead, illuminating the path, while Mario swung his machete behind him. In that desperation, Mario felt that the creature had started running on all fours. One of his swings struck the creature just before it caught up to them. More than pain, Mario said it let out a growl of anger. The others, alerted by their cries for help, tried to approach and shot into the air, which perhaps scared off the being that seemed to follow them. But it kept a safe distance. Mario and Benja returned pale, shaken, and crying. Mario's machete had blood on it, so we had to at least partly believe the story they had just told us. Shortly after, we believed them completely. We could see the figure of that enormous creature, standing a few meters from the ranch entrance through the window. From a distance, it looked like it could have been a man trying to scare us when he saw us at the window, but I still clearly remember that there was nothing human about that figure. The snowfall wasn't as heavy as expected, so we returned early to Tijuana the next day. However, my uncle stayed in touch with Don Manuel during those days, and at least then, that creature didn't return. They decided not to tell the ranch owner what had happened. If I ever go back to that place, I would would like to do it with people accompanying me, not with weapons, but with an arsenal of cameras. You never know what you might encounter in the middle of those. A warm kiss to everyone who reads or hears the take care, especially at night.